Long ago in the early 1970s, the peaceful little town by the Mississippi River was where young Linda Parker and Henry Adams first met. Linda had just turned 19 and graduated from high school, while Henry was a tall, agile senior with a smile that made many girls' hearts flutter. They met at a mutual friend's birthday party, and from that moment on, the small town suddenly seemed to glow in their eyes. Just by seeing the familiar bicycle parked in front of the ice cream shop, Linda could tell exactly where Henry was. Youth at that time was beautiful in its innocence and recklessness. They often met under the old oak tree at the edge of town, where the breeze was cool and no one disturbed them. Linda had a white silk scarf with yellow daisies, a birthday gift from Henry. She often wore it when going to see him, and he would tease, "If this scarf could talk, it would tell how many times we've been secretly meeting." Linda blushed and playfully hit him, but every time she would hide the scarf in her bag like a secret keepsake. Yet the times did not allow the young couple much peace. War broke out, and Henry had to enlist. On the day he left, Linda ran after the old bus, waving frantically, her eyes blurred with tears. Henry handed her the daisy silk scarf one last time, his voice breaking. "Keep this, okay? I'll come back." But war promises nothing. News from the front was sparse and often confusing. Once, Linda received a telegram mistakenly reporting Henry's death, leaving her inconsolable. A few months later, she would receive a letter from him saying he was still alive but constantly on the move, uncertain when he could return. Time passed, and Linda gradually grew exhausted from waiting and facing family pressure. Her parents advised her to marry to settle her life, and George Parker, a respectable bank officer a few years older, was considered the perfect choice. George was gentle and quiet, but valued honor and family reputation above all. Linda accepted his proposal with tears, hiding the daisy scarf deep in her drawer as if burying a first love that never had a chance to grow. Years went by. Henry returned from the war, but Linda was already settled as George's wife and the mother of 2 obedient children. They only heard about each other through mutual friends, and neither reached out. Linda's family life was peaceful in a somewhat dull way. George was the kind of man who loved his family, but didn't know how to express it. He liked dinner on time, watching the 7 p.m. financial news, and going to bed early to wake up for golf with friends. Linda often wanted to talk, but whenever she tried, he only cared about stock prices or inflation reports. To be fair, George was not a bad man. He cared for his family and managed finances well, but he valued honor more than emotions. He wanted his wife to dress neatly, speak politely in public, and never failed to remind her, "Don't do anything that could affect our family image." Linda could only smile politely. Married life in old age was sometimes humorously sad. Linda liked eating ice cream at night, while George insisted that ice cream was the enemy of cholesterol. One night, he caught her sneaking to the fridge at 11 p.m. and scolded, "Are you trying to ruin your health?" Linda replied nonchalantly, "You worry so much about my health, but what about my heart?" George froze, not knowing how to respond, then muttered as he went upstairs. Then one autumn morning, Linda received an invitation to the high school reunion after 40 years. Scanning the guest list, her eyes stopped at a familiar name, Henry Adams. Her heart unexpectedly raced like it did in her teenage years. She told herself, "I'm old now. Why be nervous? He's just an old friend." But all day she held the invitation, imagining how Henry might look now. Had his hair turned gray? Did he still have that smile? That afternoon, while George went to play golf, Linda quietly opened the drawer and took out the daisy scarf, now yellowed with time. She gently stroked the silk, remembering a youth both brilliant and full of loss. Suddenly, Linda laughed to herself, a laugh both embarrassed and bittersweet. "Oh, I'm really old and yet still dreaming?" But it wasn't only Linda who felt nervous. In another town, Henry, now a silver-haired but still dignified man, also received the invitation. He muttered to his daughter, "A high school reunion, huh? I wonder if Linda will go." His daughter's eyes widened. "Who are you talking about, Dad? Which mom?" Henry awkwardly smiled. "Oh, just an old friend, sweetheart. Back in the day, I was great at shuttlecock. Everyone knew that." "Dad, it's a reunion, not a shuttlecock tournament." His daughter scowled playfully and walked away. A first love that seemed long buried was suddenly gently knocking at fate's door. And Linda, though trying to appear calm in front of her husband, felt a flutter in her heart, the kind of childish excitement she thought had been lost forever. The reunion day arrived faster than Linda expected. All week, she fussed over her wardrobe like a young girl going to her first party. The floral dresses George called tacky, the sweaters she herself thought were old-fashioned. Nothing seemed right. In the end, Linda chose a pale blue dress, simple yet elegant, enough to avoid drawing attention, yet just enough so that, if someone looked closely, they could see she still kept her figure. The reunion was held in the old school auditorium. The moment she stepped inside, Linda felt a strange atmosphere. Laughter and chatter filled the air, yet everyone seemed slightly confused. Because no one recognized each other at first. Some had gray hair, some had paunches, some leaned on canes, yet all enthusiastically waved. They called each other by the familiar names of the past, followed by a common phrase, "Oh my, is that you? I hardly recognized you." "Yeah, time is ruthless." Then a deep, warm voice rang from behind. "My hair used to be black as coal. Now it's snow-covered all year round." Linda turned. It was Henry. He stood there, hair silver but neatly cut, eyes bright, and a smile just as it had been, the same smile that once made Linda's heart skip a beat. He wore a white shirt, gray vest, holding a fedora. In that instant, Linda felt as if she were 19 again, standing under the oak tree, listening to Henry tell stories. "Linda?" Henry called, his voice full of emotion. "Henry," she replied softly, her throat tightening. Throughout the reunion, they sat side by side, talking as if they had never been apart. Henry spoke of his years at war, the scar on his shoulder from shrapnel, and a near-death experience trapped in a gun emplacement. At that moment, Linda, all I could think of was you and the daisy scarf. Truly, I promised myself that if I survived, I had to come back to see you, even just to say hello. And look, here I am. Henry smiled, though his eyes reflected a deep sorrow. Linda fell silent. She didn't dare tell him how she had cried herself dry after receiving that mistaken telegram years ago, nor that the scarf still lay quietly in the bottom of her drawer all those decades. She only replied softly, "I'm still here too." After the reunion, Henry asked for Linda's phone number. At first she hesitated, but then gave it to him. And so began the late-night messages and calls, quiet, unhurried, simply two old friends sharing with each other. Linda told him about her quiet married life, about George, a strict husband who seldom listened. "There are nights I can't sleep, you know. I lie staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick, feeling utterly alone. George sleeps soundly beside me, as if the whole world has nothing to do with him." Henry smiled sadly. "Same here. After my wife passed, I lived alone. The house is too big. Only the wind and the TV fill it. Sometimes I think the scariest part of old age isn't illness, but loneliness." They shared things no one else would listen to. The more they talked, the more Linda realized Henry still understood her as he did long ago. A single word, a sigh, and he could sense her mood. Then one evening, Henry said, "Do you use social media? I just learned to use it. It's faster than calling." Linda laughed. "Me? Those apps are just for kids showing off their food." But eventually, she had her grandson help install the messaging app. And so began the comedic drama. Linda and Henry tried to use emojis but kept getting them wrong. Once, Henry meant to send a heart emoji but accidentally sent a carrot. Linda replied with a fish emoji. The next day, her grandson saw the messages and burst out laughing. "Grandma, are you and that Mr. flirting with vegetables?" Linda blushed. "Delete it right now. Don't tell your parents." And Henry, once intending to text "Goodnight, Linda," typed "Sleep forever, Linda" by mistake, making her panic and call him in the middle of the night. "Are you wishing me good night or sending me off forever?" Henry laughed awkwardly. "Just a typo." Those little moments made their aging hearts feel strangely youthful. They eagerly awaited each other's messages like when they first fell in love. Linda hid her phone under her pillow, fearing George would notice. Henry would secretly call from the porch, talking while gazing at the starry sky. One evening, Henry said he had a gift for Linda. They met at a small cafe near the river, an ordinary place unnoticed by anyone, but to them, a private little world. Henry placed a small silver USB in front of her. "This has the music we used to listen to under the oak tree. I recorded it from an old vinyl. Old love can handle technology too. He laughed, eyes sparkling. Linda held the USB, tears prickling her eyes. She didn't know how to thank him, only gently squeezed Henry's hand. In that moment, it felt as if time had reversed 40 years. Just the two of them, an old song, and the long-dormant flutter of their hearts. But Linda had no idea that the revival of a first love was also the kindling, quietly preparing to ignite her long, quiet life. George was not the suspicious type. After decades together, Linda had always been gentle and attentive. Yet recently, something had changed. Linda often smiled to herself while holding her phone. Once, George saw her swiping, deleting, then sitting lost in thought as if daydreaming. Whenever she prepared to meet friends, she started putting on lipstick. This puzzled George. Since when did his wife, over 70, care about what shade of pale pink matched her skin? One afternoon, George tried to act casual. "Was the reunion fun today?" Linda replied lightly, "Yes, very fun. Seeing so many old friends made me feel young again." George nodded, but a pang struck his heart. Young again? Did that mean she was happy to see someone special? Then one evening, when Linda went to take a shower, George noticed her phone left on the table. He wasn't tech-savvy. His own smartphone still used the default ding-ding ringtone and had no complicated password. But Linda's phone wasn't locked either. A simple swipe opened it. George, wearing his reading glasses, hands trembling, opened the messaging app. A bunch of strange icons appeared. Smiling faces, hearts, flowers. He muttered as he read each line, "Good night, Linda." Huh, what's this? "A carrot sent to you." Who the heck is sending this nonsense? George misread punctuation, turning periods into commas and exclamation marks into the number 1. He even mistook the red heart emoji for a danger warning. The more he read, the hotter he became. Messages with hidden meanings like "miss you a lot" or "did you listen to the song last night?" made him furious. "Linda, what are you doing behind my back?" George gritted his teeth but stopped himself. If he made a scene now, she might hide things even more. George decided to follow her. The next day, Linda said she would meet some old friends at the Riverside Cafe. George used the excuse of back pain to stay home, but as soon as she left, he secretly called a taxi to tail her. He even used the map app on his phone. It took him nearly 10 minutes just to find the locate button until the driver had to turn around and help. "Sir, let me press it for you. If you do it that way, you'll accidentally call an ambulance." At the park, George hid behind a tree. His heart pounded like a young man's. From afar, he saw Linda sitting on a bench with a silver-haired man in a gray vest, Henry. They were just eating ice cream and talking, but the way they looked at each other made George boil with rage. He grabbed his phone to take a proof photo, but before he could press the button, the selfie mode activated. The screen showed his own huge face. It took another 5 minutes to switch back to the regular camera. By the time he finally snapped a picture, Linda's melting ice cream had dripped onto Henry's hand, and both of them laughed like children. The scene hit George straight in the heart. Not only George, the neighbors also started gossiping. Mrs. Smith, famous for her nosiness, stopped George at the door. "George, yesterday I saw Linda with a strange man. She looks years younger." George forced a smile. "Thanks for noticing." But inside, he boiled. "Years younger? What does that mean? Is it because of that old man?" That afternoon, George waited for Linda to return and slammed the door behind her. "Linda, explain this to me." George's voice was harsh, eyes red. Linda froze. "What's wrong with you?" "Don't pretend I know everything. Who did you meet at the park? Why are there messages to you all night? Good night, Linda. A carrot sent to you. What does all that mean?" Linda, embarrassed but amused, replied, "You read the emojis wrong. Carrots and hearts are different." "Different or not, the meaning is still shady." George slammed the table. "What do you take me for?" The argument erupted. George shouted, his voice hoarse. Linda couldn't hold back her tears. "You're always suspicious. In all these decades, have you ever asked if I'm happy or sad? I just want someone to listen." "So you find someone else to listen to you?" George yelled, hands trembling. Linda stepped back, exhausted. "You don't understand. Henry is just an old friend. We've done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong, but hiding it?" George glared. The air in the house thickened, as if every word weighed heavily. Linda suddenly felt dizzy, legs wobbly. The argument was too intense for their age. She leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. I'm so tired. George panicked immediately, rushing to support his wife. In that moment, the anger melted away, leaving only fear and worry. But the fracture had already left a deep mark, not something that could be erased like a message on a phone. George could not swallow his jealousy. After the fierce argument with Linda, he couldn't sleep all night, pacing the living room, yellow light casting shadows over his wrinkled, furious face. In his mind, only one thought circled: I need to settle this with Henry. The next morning, George went to the senior exercise club, where Henry often worked out with his friends. As soon as he saw his silver-haired rival stretching comfortably, George charged at him, voice sharp. Henry, we need to talk. Henry hadn't yet understood when George swung toward his collar. But the speed of a 70-year-old is far from that of a 20-year-old. George's attack was so slow that Henry merely tilted aside to dodge. George, calm down. Let's talk about this, Henry said, stepping back. Talk about what? Are you trying to steal my wife? George shouted, hands trembling. The other seniors nearby panicked, some eagerly, started filming. George lunged, Henry lost patience, and the two old men began a clumsy fight. One of George's punches missed, hitting nothing, causing him to lose balance and fall flat. Henry tried to help him up, but George pushed away and swung again, this time slipping, and both of them tumbled onto the grass. The crowd rushed to intervene. Stop, careful or you'll break a bone. What a fight! Didn't hit anyone and already on the ground. Finally, Henry and George were escorted to a bench, faces red, unclear whether from anger or exhaustion. I'm telling you again, Henry, stay away from Linda. George panted, eyes wild. Henry, also upset, replied, Linda is an old friend. You have no right to insult her, or me. Old friend texting hearts? Old friend eating ice cream together, George growled. We're just talking, George. You're too suspicious, Henry said bitterly. The reconciliation failed. George went home, filled with resentment and shame at his own childish behavior. That evening, Linda was alone at home. The tension of the past few days, combined with the argument and worry for her husband, made her feel dizzy. She tried to get up to take her blood pressure medicine, but her legs suddenly gave way. The daisy scarf, a keepsake from her youth, slipped from her hands onto the floor. Linda tried to call George, but it was too late. She collapsed beside the phone, her mouth twisted to one side, consciousness slowly fading. When George arrived home, his anger vanished instantly. The sight of Linda lying motionless on the floor threw him into panic. Linda! Oh my God, Linda! George trembled as he called for help, his voice breaking like a child's. In the hospital corridor, Henry appeared as soon as he heard the news. No one had invited him. No one chased him away. He rushed over, panting, eyes filled with genuine worry. George saw Henry and instinctively wanted to push him away, but at the emergency room entrance, all resentment faded. They sat beside each other in silence for a long while, listening only to the beeping machines and hospital announcements. Finally, George spoke, his voice hoarse. I am sorry for this morning. Henry nodded slightly. I was wrong too. I shouldn't have put Linda in such a difficult situation. They fell silent again. George looked down at the daisy scarf Linda always kept, one he had unconsciously snatched from her pocket before the ambulance arrived. In his rage, he had torn it apart. Now, seeing the frayed threads, he felt deep regret. This scarf? It means so much to her. I've ruined it. Henry quietly took the torn pieces. Without a word, he pulled a needle and thread from his coat pocket, something he always carried to sew buttons back in his army days, and began carefully stitching each seam. Under the cold hospital light, his aged hands trembled, but worked meticulously, sewing each daisy petal, each tear, as if repairing trust itself. The scene was both sorrowful and beautiful, like a quiet film. George watched Henry closely, seeing for the first time that this man was not a rival, but a part of Linda's youth, a youth George had never fully understood. Inside the emergency room, Linda was in a deep coma. In her dreams, she returned to her 20s, the day Henry, in uniform, went off to the battlefield. Linda handed him the daisy scarf, tears streaming endlessly. You must come back. Remember to take this scarf with you. I promise. Henry smiled, though his eyes were also red. Then the painful memory struck, a misdelivered casualty telegram. Linda had collapsed to the floor when she read the words, Lieutenant Henry has fallen. That pain stayed with her for life, Even when a second letter arrived correcting the mistake, Henry was alive. Her heart had shattered once then, a crack that never fully healed. In her comatose dream, Linda ran and cried across the smoky battlefield, searching for Henry, calling endlessly, but unable to reach him. The wailing of sirens blended with the thumping of her heartbeat in real life. Linda's funeral was simple, with no elaborate flower arrangements, only a few old friends, children and grandchildren, and an old song playing from the USB that Henry had once given her. George sat silently, no longer angry or jealous. Henry stood nearby, hesitant to step closer until George finally turned to him. "Keep the daisy scarf. She treasured it a lot." Henry shook his head. "No, it belongs to you. She loved you all her life." George held the scarf, his wrinkled hand tightening, tears streaming down. "But she also left a piece of her youth with you. Keep it, so we both remember how foolish we once were." The two old men stood by Linda's grave, no longer rivals but friends sharing a memory. They did not argue, just as the letter had requested. Instead, they quietly watched the white daisies on the grave sway in the wind, as if Linda was smiling somewhere, reminding them that life is too short for hatred, but long enough for love if cherished. The next day, Henry returned to another city, and George went back to the empty house. But in both their hearts, Linda remained, not as a wound, but as a gentle light illuminating the rest of their old age. Linda's funeral took place on a bright, gentle morning, pure and clear, as if she had chosen the most beautiful day to say goodbye. There was no solemn trumpet, only the chirping of sparrows in the cemetery trees. Linda's old friends came in large numbers, gray-haired, slow-footed, yet eyes full of memories. They stood together, recounting passionate youth. Linda, the girl with the daisy scarf, had captured many hearts, but reserved herself only for two men. One her husband, the other an old friend, like the shadow of a first love. Stories echoed, sometimes making the crowd laugh and cry at once. Remember when Linda was late for school but still styled her hair? Remember the time she argued with the professor just because she said daisies are prettier than roses? Remember the farewell when Henry went to the battlefield? Linda cried until her eyes were swollen. George sat quietly in the front row, holding the carefully mended daisy scarf. Henry stood a few steps away, not daring to intrude, yet his eyes never left Linda's grave. Though they were old, the distance between them still felt tense, but this time there was no anger, only sadness and regret. After the burial, people gradually left. The cemetery was empty except for George and Henry standing face to face. The silence stretched long enough to hear the wind through the eucalyptus trees. Finally, George spoke in a hoarse voice. "Come closer. I won't bite." Henry stepped forward slowly, cautious. "I just want to see Linda off for a moment." George sighed. "She always treasured you. All my life I envied that, but now I see how foolish I was." They were silent for a while longer. George glanced at the tombstone, giving a bitter smile. "My life has lost to hers in love and health. I hadn't even won our fight before she fell ill." Henry laughed, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm no better. Remember that day? I almost hit myself while swinging my arms. Two old men fighting. Linda must have laughed from somewhere." George nodded, and both laughed. A laugh mingled with tears, self-mockery, and pain. A while later, George took the daisy scarf from his pocket and handed it to Henry. "Last time I told you to keep it, you refused. Now take it. Consider it a memory Linda is sending you." Henry took the scarf, hands trembling. Then he unfolded it, gently laid it on the grave, and whispered, "It should stay here. This is where Linda remains, and this is where we reconcile." George placed his hand on the scarf. Henry placed his on top. Two aged, wrinkled hands, for the first time, were not opposing but sharing the same emotion. They stood silently for a long time, saying nothing, letting the wind make the newly stitched threads quiver like daisies blooming again on the grave. Finally, George exhaled softly. "I forgive you. No, there's really nothing to forgive. We're just old and still. Foolish." Henry nodded. "Me too. Forgive me and forgive yourself as well. Linda never wanted to see us hurt each other." George smiled softly, voice low. "Yes, she wants us to live on, not argue at her grave. She even teased me in the letter." They laughed together again, more gently this time. This laughter was no longer bitter. It was like a farewell to Linda, a promise that they would live the rest of their lives more peacefully and kindly. As the sun set, They left the cemetery together. No one said, "See you again," but both knew that from now on, they would no longer avoid each other. Love, friendship, jealousy, guilt, all remained beneath the soil, along with the woman they both cherished. On Linda's grave, the carefully stitched daisy scarf lay neatly, a symbol of reconciliation and enduring love, not just between one person and another, but of the human heart with itself. Anyone passing by that day would have seen two old men limping side by side toward the gate, talking and laughing, tears still lingering on their cheeks. And if one listened carefully, one could hear George's last words. "Henry, remember, love and say I love you while you still can. At any age, the heart knows how to feel and how to ache." When the emergency room door swung open, a doctor stepped out, voice serious. "The patient had a severe stroke, high blood pressure. We are doing our best. You two should prepare yourselves." George's hands and legs went weak, while Henry held the freshly sewn daisy scarf, the threads glinting with tears. Neither had anything left to argue about, only a shared fear of losing Linda forever. In the stark white room, Linda lay motionless, the machines breathing evenly for her. A cold draft from the hallway window swept in, as if signaling the storm was not over. Linda awoke after 2 days in a deep coma. The hospital room was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock was audible. George held his wife's hand the entire time the doctor allowed, while Henry stood silently at the end of the bed, careful not to disturb her. "It's you," Linda smiled weakly at George, her voice faint. "Your face looks terrible." George choked back tears. "No matter how bad I look, as long as you wake up." Linda turned to Henry, her gaze gentle yet distant. "And you too, Henry, still as stubborn as ever. Haven't aged a bit." Henry forced a smile, eyes red. Since Linda's collapse, he felt like an intruder in someone else's happiness, even though his feelings were pure. Throughout the morning, Linda spoke very little. She listened more, sometimes closing her eyes, her hand lightly holding George's. But George sensed something unusual, not only because of her illness, but also because Linda's eyes seemed to have made a decision. That night, Linda waited until George had dozed off on the chair. She took a blank sheet of paper and a pen from the bedside drawer and slowly wrote each line, her handwriting slightly shaky but still legible. "Dear George, old friend Henry, if tomorrow I don't wake up, please don't argue at my grave. No matter who loses, I won't know anyway. Life is short. Don't let pride and selfishness destroy love, friendship, and even yourselves. I have loved, I have been angry, I have cried, and now I feel I've had enough. Live on. Don't make each other pay the price for an old heart like mine." Linda put down her pen and smiled softly at her own humor in the last lines. She folded the letter and placed it next to the daisy scarf that Henry had carefully stitched back together. The next morning, the doctor came to check on her and found Linda still weak. George hurriedly shook his wife awake, and Henry ran over as well. Linda opened her eyes and softly said, "Don't make a noise. I just want to sleep a long while." George burst into tears. "Linda, don't leave me. I was wrong. I was unreasonably jealous. I made you suffer. I swear from now on, as long as you're by my side, I will never doubt you again." Henry's voice choked as well. "Linda, I was wrong too. I never thought that an old friendship could put you under so much pressure." Linda looked at the two old men, one her husband, the other a memory from her youth. She shook her head gently and smiled weakly. "You two are so silly. Love is not about winning or losing." As soon as she finished speaking, Linda closed her eyes. The heart monitor began to beep an alarm. Doctors rushed in, and nurses gently pushed George and Henry outside. Both stood frozen in the hallway, unable to look at each other, only listening to the hurried footsteps and the urgent sounds of the medical equipment. An hour later, the door opened. The doctor shook his head softly. "We did everything we could. She passed very peacefully." George sank onto a chair, hands trembling. Henry stood beside him, clutching the daisy scarf Linda had left behind. On the hospital table, her short letter lay neatly, like a gentle but firm farewell. George opened the letter, reading each word slowly, crying and smiling at the same time when he reached the joke. "Don't argue at my grave, no matter who loses. I won't know anyway." Henry couldn't hold back tears either, but inside he felt a strange sense of peace, as if Linda had already forgiven them both long ago. Nếu bạn yêu thích những câu chuyện cảm xúc, những chia sẻ chân thực về cuộc sống, tình yêu và các mối quan hệ, Đừng quên nhấn nút đăng ký kênh ngay hôm nay để không bỏ lỡ bất kỳ video nào từ chúng tôi. Mỗi tuần, kênh sẽ mang đến cho bạn những video mới với nội dung phong phú, từ những câu chuyện tự sự đầy xúc động, những bài học cuộc sống, cho đến những giây phút giải trí hài hước, nhưng cũng đầy ý nghĩa. Hãy bật chuông thông báo để là người đầu tiên xem các video mới, tham gia vào cộng đồng những người yêu thích chia sẻ và kết nối, nơi bạn có thể bình luận, trao đổi ý kiến và tìm thấy những người bạn cùng sở thích. Nhấn đăng ký ngay để mỗi câu chuyện, mỗi trải nghiệm đều trở thành hành trình bạn không muốn bỏ lỡ.